Welcome back to Bazaar. I'm Inko, and today we aren't going to be playing the game. Today we're going to be yapping. Right now, Bazaar has a bi-weekly patch schedule where every other week we get a patch, and on the off weeks after I've been in the meta for a week, had time to see how it develops, I'll give my feedback for the current patch. And that's what we'll be doing today, talking about the meta, how it feels, what cards feel good, what cards feel bad, and what specific tuning knobs I feel confident enough in to call out as things I would like to see change. But first and foremost, we're going to be starting every video with this until it changes. Normal's play button is a picture of the chest. You know, the chest you only get from playing ranks, not from playing normal. So we'll be starting every one of these videos by calling out the UI as being objectively wrong, and that's just going to be how this starts. Every other week until this gets changed, maybe forever, because it's super minor and probably not high on their priority list. But that icon is just objectively misinforming new players. It has no relevance to what you're doing and should be literally anything else. Now, let's start broad. What is the current meta? Well, there's a reason we're looking at Vanessa. The current meta is Vanessa. You'll see in a given run, up to 100% Vanessas, maybe like 1 in 4 will be pigs if it's a run with a lot more variance than usual, and you might see Dooley every other run. Is that factually accurate to the stats? Probably not. That's certainly how it feels. I know I've had runs where I didn't see Dooley frequently. I don't feel like I see Pig even 1 in 4 days, and certainly I've played Vanessa like 10 times more than Dooley this patch, and at least twice as much as Pig. I'm not doing anything to help the perception that the meta is dominated by Vanessa, because my playstats probably reflect exactly what I'm saying the latter feels like. Now, the reason Vanessa is the most common is sort of twofold. One, anyone who's trying to climb the ladder will gravitate towards aggro decks, and that is what Vanessa is. Her weapon deck is going to be the fastest build for completing games, and provided it has a comparable play rate, people who want to climb will always gravitate towards the faster deck with the same win rate. That's not the reason Vanessa's dominating the ladder, though, at least I don't think so. It's because weapon Vanessa is genuinely one of the strongest builds. I don't know if wide Vanessa or single big weapon Vanessa is better, but it's ultimately a moot point because there's a ton of overlap between those builds, and basically which one you end up playing comes down to what your run gives you. It just depends on what you get, but there's a lot of flexibility between the two. They both play very similarly, and they're both very, very strong. If they aren't statistically the best, I would be surprised, but I would be shocked to hear if they weren't at least very close to the best builds in the game. And it's also worth noting that when you sit down to play, I feel like you can go into weapon Vanessa a greater percentage of the time when you start a Vanessa game than any other build for Vanessa or any build on Pig and Dooley. It's just very easy to force yourself into that archetype with Vanessa. And that does matter in terms of what you're going to play, right? A lot of people who used to like playing Dooley aren't playing Dooley anymore. I know my girlfriend is a Dooley main who played exclusively Dooley until the Fixer Upper patch. And she stopped playing pretty much completely at this point because Dooley doesn't feel fun to her. A big part of the thing that's holding Dooley back is that same thing I was just talking about, the ability to reliably sit down and play the thing you want to. I know forcing's not supposed to be a part of the game, but if I sit down and want to play weapon Vanessa, it's nice that I can actually reliably hit weapon Vanessa, if not a specific build. I think it's widely agreed upon that most of Dooley's cores are kind of terrible. So being forced to pick between only 2 of them feels really bad, especially with recent patches having essentially gutted the shield core by removing duct tape, making shield enchant far less likely because you no longer get to pick from 3 enchants, and pushing the force field back to silver. So now there's another bad core, and realistically I would say that no core is even exceptional with the nerf to ignition core. None of the cores are particularly strong, and it feels like the best build for any Dooley is to try to go into power drill. And this is not me saying power drill is overpowered, I think it's just the best thing available to Dooley, and the fact that Dooley's cores feel bad and you're forced to pick between only 2 of them frequently means that you sit down, Dooley tells you what kind of game you're going to be playing, and then actually that's not even the game you're playing, you're just using that to the best of its ability as you try to transition to something else. And Dooley feels like the character where I at least have the ability to control what my run looks like. I think most people probably don't connect to Dooley as a playstyle. And what I mean by that is when people talk about Vanessa, she's the early game champion. When people talk about Pig, they talk about him like he's the late game champion. These are true to some degree, of course. Income's more valuable the longer the game runs. Raw damage is more valuable the less time your opponent has to scale up their maximum health. But a Vanessa that goes 10 wins, 1 on day 10, a pig that went 10 wins must have started winning at least on day 7, which I think we all agree is the mid game. These characters, whether they be late game or early game, to go 10 wins, which good players are trying to do every run, are going to be winning in the mid game. So there's no mid game niche for Dooley to dominate in. He doesn't dominate it. I don't think he's ever been, the sales pitch has never been Dooley's the mid game hero. But the issue with Dooley is that it doesn't feel like there's a niche for him. You start your run by picking from bad cores, and then at no point in the run do you feel like there's a thing your character is meant to dominate. It feels like the sales pitch for Dooley is the same sales pitch as Matchbox Pig, where it's supposed to be like a bunch of items all interlocking and accelerating each other. But over the course of time, we've just nerfed all of the Dooley items that were fast, and now when you pick between garbage cores and your build's not that fast, why are we playing Dooley? I think that's why I'm seeing no Dooley, because Dooley doesn't have a fantasy he fulfills. I can't sit down to play Dooley and expect to hit a certain type of game. I think it's just not fun, mostly, right? Especially when you try to optimize, and like, no matter how I start, all builds funnel into power drill. That's the impression I have of why Dooley is so absent from the meta. Whereas with Pig, I think Pig's just not really common in the meta because losing to Weapon Vanessa sucks. It's a lot harder to get to the late game when Weapon Vanessa is just steamrolling you for the first 12 days of the game. So with the current power level of Weapon Vanessa, there are still pigs who are willing to try to make it work, and I really enjoy playing Pig in spite of this, but it does really feel much harder to make Pig work in the current patch than in previous patches, and I think part of that is because Pig has so much less flexibility. I think the ability to pivot is what really makes Vanessa so much more playable and so much more fun than the other heroes, because whether you go wide weapons or big weapon, it all comes from the same place, the same cards feed into both archetypes. It's easy to pivot from one to the other and to be open to both, and in the very early game, before you even get fully into weapons Vanessa, just slapping a catfish on your board is a relevant amount of damage, right? If you're expecting to go into other aggro matchups, which is very common, people just beat you down in the early game with like a flail and left-handed, for instance. Then the defensive stuff from Aquatic Vanessa and Poison Vanessa fits into your build. It feels like a bunch of different pieces are open to Vanessa, where you can use things that are not meant for your build and still benefit from them. Whereas like with Pig, Crook is not going on a Matchbox board and vice versa, ever. There's so much less overlap between what cards are wanted by the builds. I am never going to put Yo-Yo or Matchbox or Marbles or Toy Ship, Model Ship rather, into any Pig build that is not built around several of those cards, basically. Yo-Yo's the exception, it shouldn't have been included there. But it's just generally much less flexible on any hero that's not Vanessa. I feel like Vanessa has the least dead cards and the most overlap between her builds, and that makes her the most fun. She's the most powerful, that definitely feeds into it, but I feel like the reason Pig feels so much weaker this patch is at least in part because Crook's not really something that's strong enough to go toe-to-toe with Weapon Vanessa. And if you know that you're not going to be playing a slow-scaling weapon build with like a Ganjo and a Flail, you know you're not going to be playing a Crook build, these things just aren't good enough to win right now, that sort of narrows it down into like a couple different high roll avenues that yes, you can reliably play into them, yes, you can win with Pig, he's still good. But there's suddenly so many fewer cards in the game that you actually care about. And I feel like that's at least the case with Vanessa. I think that's why so many people are playing her. It's about flexibility and pivoting and general fun. And part of that comes from the power level of the character, but part of that power level comes from these things that are fun to do inherently. I think the best example of this is Figurehead for Vanessa, where if you're going wide weapons, it's incredible because it gives you so much damage. If you're going big weapons, it's actually still playable in those big weapon builds. If you're using certain weapons, double barrel, cutlass, and flagship being the best ones. If you're going poison, then it's going to reduce all your cooldowns and meaningfully accelerate your build, right? Basically, every version of Vanessa at least looks briefly at Figurehead because it can work in so many different builds. And honestly, I don't think Dooley or Pig have anything that really matches up to that level of flexibility. The closest thing in my mind is the Ganjo and Pig because basically every Pig build in the early game wants to use Ganjo because it's so strong, but it's less that Ganjo's good in your build and more that Ganjo is so good that it can carry your early game and give you a chance of winning, not so much that it fits into a lot of builds. Before I go to more specific feedback on certain cards, I do want to mention on this subject of pivoting, the economy rebalance directly impacts how much you're able to pivot. So do the opening kits, right? If you get a kit that gives you nothing but skills, or like one small golden item and skills, you might find that you actually have less income early than you had previously. A lot of the time, I'll take the kit that just gives me the most ability to generate gold day one to give myself the best start by getting the best value out of my shops. And a huge part of being able to pivot is how much gold you have. I think that generally the new economy is much healthier. I have way less runs where I get into the late game and money doesn't matter to me anymore. I think that was the goal of the change, and I think that was accomplished. However, one thing I do find is that I am far less likely to roll at shops, especially in the very early game and in the mid game when I might otherwise be looking to pivot. If a shop costs 2 gold, I'm super happy to re-roll it. But the moment it hits 4, I start really considering if it's worth rolling, what I have to liquidate if I even find something. And once shops hit gold, I'm very frequently not rolling at that shop. I think the roll cost is probably something that could afford to be reduced. I don't know if you could reduce it all the way down to 1, 2, 3, 4 from the current 2, 4, 6, 8, just half the roll cost. But I would like to see that tried out. I feel like rolling is something that should be encouraged, not to look for the best builds, but to be able to pivot at all. That's the problem, really, is the better you are at finding items to pivot into more options, the better you are at finding the thing that just makes you stronger, right? But I think that's a necessary evil. I think being able to roll and look for things is a very important, fun part of the game, and for the purpose of pivoting and player agency, I feel the current economy makes rolling and thus finding builds in the mid game a little bit prohibitive. My first bit of specific feedback is on damage multiplication with spices. There used to be a bug with this and sniper rifle, but that was such a niche combination and not a great build in the first place that it very rarely came up. What happens is that essentially anything that multiplies damage will snapshot the value and apply spices twice. So what you would see is sniper rifle is dealing 1,000 damage 10 times its base 100, spices goes off, it goes up to 2,000, and then it recalculates and it multiplies by 10, and the number isn't 20,000, it's doing something a bit weirder than that. It's like the base damage plus the additional 1,000 times 10. But the point is that because of the snapshotting and recalculating with multiple doubling effects, there was this build that used to be very minor and unimportant that didn't happen that often, but it was much stronger than it should have been. Now, because of the obsidian enchantment, not on spices itself, but on any weapon, if I have, say, a cutlass with obsidian and spices goes off, the double damage bonus will happen twice. I believe it comes out to be 3x damage, I don't quite remember how it goes down, but because of snapshotting with obsidian, spices has this interaction that is, to me, it just feels like a bug, it does not feel like intentional design, and it feels very bad to lose when somebody's item does twice what it's supposed to do because of a random enchantment. If this is intentional design, I dislike it. To me, it feels like a bug. Next up, I want to briefly call attention to Waterwheel, and more specifically, its upgrade pattern of just reducing its cooldown by 1 second, which feels meaningless to me. When I played Pufferfish Vanessa or any Poison Vanessa, the difference in silver and diamond feels next to non-existent to me. I don't think this feels good to upgrade as a player, and it feels weird that poison can often dominate the mid game, but a lot of the time it's dominating by using a silver item that is almost identical to its diamond version. I don't know that this is a big problem, but Waterwheel's design feels very out of place to me. Or rather, not its design as a whole, but its upgrades. Next up, we have Brick Buddy, but Brick Buddy is really a stand-in here for every scaling defensive option in the game, even stuff like Turtle Shell. This might be more a statement of the meta. Maybe the scaling defenses don't need to be buffed, maybe the things that kill you quickly need to be nerfed, but right now, Brick Buddy feels like one of the weakest cards in the game. Every slow scaling defensive option feels like a waste of time. The offensive builds kill you so quickly that this design for a card, when other items go off, gain shield, every 5 seconds gain scaled shield, this doesn't work in the game currently. There are a lot of cards that fulfill the same role as Brick Buddy that do not feel like they're worth investing in. Brick Buddy feels infinitely worse than an Isocoric Freezer for keeping you alive, as an example. Fast, immediate disruption feels like the only viable defense. You need immediate slow, immediate freeze. No amount of shield can happen quick enough, barring specifically Fixer-Upper, I suppose, for this to really be viable. I will say there are a couple of other edge cases I've seen, like a Cove go absolutely crazy, but generally speaking, anything that intends to scale defensive values over the course of a fight feels like it has no place in the current meta, and it's not a build you have any reason to pursue. Next up, I want to talk about Chocolate Bar. More specifically, the fact that you can get Chocolate Bar in your opening kit. The kits seem to have literally no curation. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure the way it works is they include all neutral items and all items from your class that can spawn at bronze rarity, and then they're boosted up to whatever rarity the kit gives it to you at. There needs to be some curation. If you're going to take a random enchantment on a gold item, it should not be able to give you a shiny chocolate bar. There has to be some curation for this system. It can't just be every bronze item. You should not be able to get one small enchanted item and get a shiny chocolate bar. That's ridiculous. I don't know if that specific one's impossible, but I know you can get one small gold item and have it be a chocolate bar. It feels like it's too random currently. The kits need some curation on what you can get. Even if that curation is literally just removing neutrals from the pool, I kind of feel like neutrals are only included currently. Otherwise, stuff like get a large bronze item would filter directly down to Fixer Upper. I think there's like one other thing you can hit. But right now, with no curation, a lot of the kits feel really, really bad because of their ability to pull neutral items. And you might get 4 good silver items on Vanessa that are like just a whole weapon board and you kill your opponent. Or you might get 3 wholly unrelated items in a chocolate bar. And the variance is so high because of the introduction of neutral items and complete lack of curation that it actually starts to feel pretty bad. I think the kits are a good system. I like the idea of them, but they need refinement. Another great example of the lack of curation is when you get a silver or gold skill and you get red envelope and just get 10 gold. Theoretically, this is fine. There's like a 10 gold start, but gold skills are being valued at more than 10 gold, right? If this were only available at silver skill, I would be fine with it. The issue is you can get a bronze skill and just be up 5 extra gold from where the kit should have put you, or a gold skill and be down 10 gold from where the skill should have put you. Red envelope is another example of desperately needed curation. This is, at least in some part, the reason I gravitate towards things like 2 small silver items and 5 silver loot items, is because that's just 14 gold. Because I can't low roll aside from hitting a chocolate bar maybe. Other than that, I'm guaranteed to get a big pile of gold that I can convert into things, whereas when I take other things, I might get a radiant item with a completely useless enchant for my 1 small enchanted item, right? If you get radiant on Vanessa's amulet, that's what I did. If you get shiny on a chocolate bar, someone's out there crying in a hole right now. And I feel like I have less agency when I try to optimize because I'm driven away from certain options by the lack of curation and their propensity towards massive low rolls. And speaking of massive low rolls, I'm going to be putting this in every video. As long as the artist has no additional code to prevent it from rolling the thing next to it, right? As long as I get my level 10 enchant or my level, whatever in the teens, I think 17 enchant or my death enchant, and I get to see heal on my pure damage build and the artist, and I click on the artist and it rolls into heal, I'm going to dislike the current system. I personally vastly preferred pick from 3 enchants. Yes, it made getting the enchant you want more likely. Yes, it generally made power level of builds higher. It also gave you more player agency, and it made picking certain items to maintain certain enchants that you could build around more valuable. As it stands now, I feel like enchants in general don't give me a ton of agency in terms of how I'm making my build, and very frequently I'm just hitting the slot machine with the artist and seeing what happens, and that doesn't feel great to me. I don't know how I would like to see the system changed. I just know that the current way it works does not feel engaging or cool to me. It feels like I'm just gambling. Speaking of gambling, I will pretty much always click on any extra fight event. The guaranteed ones pretty much every time, but even then on the mountain pass where I'm actually gambling, I will usually click that even over shops that I won't unless I desperately need something to make my build come together, right? I personally don't view that as a big problem, but I didn't view the previous meta where day 1 was always the exact same, 2 experience events in 1 random shop. I didn't find that to be a problem, but the devs did. They thought that was too scripted, that every game played out the same way. I personally think this thing where you always take extra fights is a problem if you view the previous day 1 as a problem. Because right now, gold's more valuable, experience is more valuable, and they're so much more valuable that extra fights feel like you automatically click them, even if it's just for a chance at them. And sure, the run doesn't play out the same way every time. It's not the same day 1 over and over again. I don't know how often it is. Maybe it's 1 in 5 hours, maybe it's 1 in 7. I don't know. But I'm going to say it feels like 1 in 5 hours, I don't make a choice. I'm just going to take the same events because they're de facto the best. And that's probably not a good thing. Next up, I want to talk about Street Gamer, the new level 3 enemy. First up, in the patch notes, when Raynan was talking about everything, he referred to the Street Gamer as the Pigglepunk. I'm going to be honest, you need to rename him to the Pigglepunk. It is a better name. Or, alternatively, what I'm suggesting, you need to rework him to stop being the Pigglepunk, because unless these items just can't be dropped, that might be the case. I haven't fought him enough to see yet, because on day 3 you always take Scout Trooper in either, right? But unless there's some code preventing him from dropping the Piggles, this is a terrible, terrible encounter, because he has a 50% chance of giving you a silver Piggle that is not going to be very good. One of the huge reasons no one was trying to fight pre-nerf Warrior is because even if your build was good enough to beat him, most of his drops were Piggles and you got no value out of that. I will say these are generally the better Piggles you could put on a table. This is not as bad as Warrior was, and this guy's much more beatable. But the fact this enemy has 3 0 gold drops that are not skills, where you will have to give up board space to get their effects, feels really, really bad, and I basically never clicked this guy because of this. On a day where I can't beat Scout Trooper and Aetherite, if this guy is my middle fight, I'm fighting one of the two on the left every single time, and it's because of the Piggles. Next up, I want to mention Harmadillo. This boy's gotten hung out to dry. This card is so much worse than it ever was. There was a patch where Harmadillo was a menace. He had his time in the sun, but right now he's down bad. Harmadillo was a viable, not particularly impressive strategy a few patches ago, and since then he has gotten hit with nerf after nerf. First, you lost the ability to reliably hit a shield enchant, which this guy desperately needs you to hit a shield enchant. Whether it's on a metronome or the Harmadillo himself, basically your ability to hit shield enchants determines the viability of late game Harmadillo. But he's gotten hit with a lot more than that. Force Field being pushed off of bronze makes it harder to make good Harmadillo boards because you need to find Harmadillo or Force Field to convert your shield items into a winning strategy, and having less payoffs means it's harder to justify going in at all, because it's less likely you find the thing that turns all of your random shield items into a viable strategy. Then, Duct Tape got stripped out of Dooley entirely, and it was basically the most powerful card in the Harmadillo build. It was the thing you needed to get Harmadillo off the ground. And let's not forget that you are now 33% less likely to find a shield core at all. All the supporting things around Harmadillo have been stripped out, and at this point his 8-second cooldown for the effect that he has is just not good enough. This is one of the many things where playing Dooley feels bad, where unless you randomly get the Duct Tape from Banana Bowl, Harmadillo and his entire archetype doesn't really feel usable. Speaking of things that don't work and don't really do anything, we have Arken's Ring. This is an item that when you sell it, it recovers prestige. And it's obviously meant to matter that it does this, right? If you just wanted to convey that Arken is fabulously wealthy, then you could have given him a sack of jewels or a golden bar or whatever, right? There are a million things you can give to convey the character has wealth. The prestige effect is given to him. This is its own unique item. It's meant to do something, and it doesn't. And it's because 5 prestige isn't enough. When the Genie Lamp was still in the game, it was able to give you 3, 6, or 9, and 9 was enough that very frequently the Genie Lamp could give you an extra day to die. That's really important because prestige only matters if it hits a breakpoint where it prevents you from dying. With Arken's Ring and Arken being first available on day 10, for it to prevent you from dying, you cannot have 5 or less prestige because you'll still die on day 10. It also doesn't do anything if you have 11 to 15 prestige, because you still wouldn't die on day 10, and 5 prestige won't be enough to prevent you from dying on the next day. This is before we even get into the fact that you can fight him and get this on like day 16, right? There are very few cases where 5 prestige is enough to prevent you from dying. This simply isn't enough prestige gain for it to matter, and right now it doesn't feel like just incrementally move this up until it feels overpowered and move it back after that patch, right? At 5, this effect feels like I've gotten it and seen streamers get it like 7, 8 times now. I've never seen it prevent a death. It doesn't do anything. Far more likely than not, you're going to get this at a value of prestige where it doesn't matter, or having already died where it can't even do anything anyway, right? Next up, I want to report some technical problems. I loaded up a normal game so I could show this off. And that is, first and foremost, this game doesn't have any key bindings. but there is a key that should be bindable, and that key is spacebar. When you press spacebar, it opens your stash. But the game is actually quite unresponsive about that key press. If you pick something up and open your spacebar, or hit your spacebar rather, open your stash, where'd that feather go? Well, it turns out it's just unresponsive. If you pick it up and while it's going into your stash, you hit that button, you won't be able to see it. In that case, I couldn't show it off because it was in the process of loading the next screen. But I can just do it here. It's 100% repeatable. If the game will let me open my stash, which sometimes it doesn't, but there, you can see that item hasn't shown up. Now it's there. I click it. I can't afford it. Like I was saying, I click it, open stash. It's missing. Reopen. It's there. It's completely consistent and repeatable. It's just very unresponsive if you open your stash too quickly after doing something. Considering the amount of time it's correct to buy something and immediately sell it, this comes up in normal gameplay all the time, and I found myself intentionally pausing after actions to get around this. Ultimately, this is really minor, but being able to bind spacebar instead of having to remap your mouse buttons is obviously the way it should be. That's how almost every game in the world works, and having this be fully responsive so that if you buy something, you don't have to wait for the game to finish its animations to open your stash is obviously the way it should be. In that case, I was spamming mouse button the whole time I bought it, and I couldn't open my stash. This time, it didn't stop me, but because the animation wasn't complete, it's not there. Neither of those things should be happening. They both need to get fixed so the game can be played faster and smoother. While I'm quitting out of this normal, I would also mention that the kits encourage people who are playing normals to immediately re-roll if they get a bad kit because it's so random. I played a couple of normals just to see how often it felt like people were re-rolling, and there is a massive difference in the first 3 days in a normals. It feels like everyone I'm seeing is high rolling. It's so rare for me to see somebody in a normal. It's a very small sample size, but I'm willing to bet the devs have stats that show them that normals are being conceded on start all the time. A double barrel I almost didn't talk about because it's going to get nerfed next patch. I don't think the devs need me to tell them that this is too strong. It's pretty apparent to me playing the game that double barrel, cutlass, and flagship are the 3 best weapons in the game, but of those 3 weapons, only double barrel is ubiquitous across every weapon Vanessa board, whereas flagship and cutlass require specific setups. I would be shocked if double barrel doesn't either get its damage severely nerfed, or more likely have its cooldown increased in the next patch. However, I don't see Flurry of Blows or Alacrity getting talked about nearly as much. They're very similar skills. Flurry of Blows is Vanessa only. The first 4 or 8 times you use a weapon each fight, charge 1 item 1 second, and Alacrity is basically the same thing. The first 5 or 10 times you crit each fight, charge 1 item 1 second. This is for everyone, and because critting is a little bit harder than using a weapon, it can be used slightly more often. However, where these things completely snap in half is with true one-weapon Vanessas. The most powerful build in the game, in my opinion, is Radiant one-weapon builds utilizing Silencer and Star Chart to lower their cooldowns, with stuff like Alacrity and Flurry of Blows, that their one weapon, which cannot be stopped, charges itself several times consecutively, and it just instantly kills your opponent when it goes off, with no chance for counterplay. Alacrity and Flurry of Blows probably both need to get the, what is it called, trick shot? Flashy reload treatment, where when you use them, they charge another item instead of just reloading an item. This will solve the same problem where throwing knives would just reload themselves and instantly empty, and I think you need to make a change like this to prevent one weapon Vanessa from always having that option, because as long as those 2 skills are in the game, right? As long as Flurry of Blows exist in this form, Radiant one weapon Vanessa will be able to make a build where after, let's say 3 seconds, that's on the slow end really, their weapon goes off, instantly uses all of the charges and kills your opponent with literally no room for counterplay. And I think that's just something where the mechanic needs to be changed, and the solution here with Flashy Reload I think is an elegant, good solution to that problem. My opinion of the meta is that Weapon Vanessa is far too strong, and that as a result the meta has gotten far too fast, because only fast builds have a real chance against Vanessa. I want to see Weapon Vanessa's power reduced, and while I don't know how much more we need in terms of buffs for Dooley and Pig, certainly for their weaker performing cards they need lots, what most of all I want for them is for them to feel good to play, for pivoting between their builds to have more possibilities. Because right now, I feel so locked into a course when I'm playing a Pig or a Dooley. It's very hard to transition in a way that I do not really feel with Vanessa. Anyways, I don't want the last 30 minutes of bitching and balance whining to take away from the fact that I love the game and want to see the Bazaar succeed as much as it possibly can. If you do make it this far into the video, I'd appreciate it if you could hit the like button on your way out. I'd really appreciate it. It does boost the channel up in the algorithm, does help it grow. And speaking of which, it's a new channel. If you want to hit subscribe for more daily Bazaar content, I wouldn't mind. I'd greatly appreciate it, in fact. Anyways, that'll be all for now. See you in the next one.